This is your reality check.
Welcome to The Reality Check, the weekly Canadian show that explores a wide range of controversies and curiosities using science and critical thinking. Today is April 19th, and I'm producer Pat. With me is Cristina Roach.
Hey, everyone.
Both Adam and Darren are, well, you guys know what the story is. We do have three great segments for you today. Adam's going to talk about how your phone can track you. Darren's going to talk to us about The Precipice, a book by Toby Ord. But first, Cristina, COVID-19. What is so different about this compared to other outbreaks that has us in quarantine?
I thought the same thing myself for a few days until I came across this coverage I'm going to talk to you guys about. Now, as we record this show, we are in our 6th week, I guess, of stay-at-home New World orders. We've all heard or read news detailing comparisons and differences between COVID-19 and other scary outbreaks like Ebola, SARS, the Swine Flu. One thought on many people's minds, including mine, is, wait a minute, I don't remember having to do anything this extreme during SARS, or ever in my life for that matter. In fact, the one thing I remember about SARS is the big concert the Rolling Stones put on. Right. Remember that, Pat?
Yeah, for sure.
And that was in an effort to help revive Toronto's economy. They have a really love affair with Toronto. So the outbreak had occurred earlier that year. In fact, when the Stones announced the concert in 2003, our fine city was still under a SARS warning from the World Health Organization. The crowd was estimated 500,000 people. And I personally can't imagine going to an event with a huge crowd until we have a vaccination, Pat. I don't know about you, but that includes a Raptors game, and we all know how much I love the Raptors.
It's certainly going to be a long time.
Yeah, maybe it's just me or just us, but it sounds like pretty sage advice. So, why is this different? Nate Silver's 538 is a well-known site that uses hard numbers, polls, statistical analysis to tell compelling stories in the realm of politics, sports, economics, science, etc. Now, they published a really comprehensive feature written by Kaylee Rogers titled, Why Did the World Shut Down for COVID-19 but Not Ebola, SARS, or Swine Flu? Now, this was exactly the info I was hoping for, with lots of citations, so I'm going to mostly cover what Rogers summarizes. There's no question that we are seeing a level of economic and societal disruption that we just haven't experienced before. We've gone through really nasty major flus, and as mentioned, Ebola, SARS, etc., but somehow those other outbreaks stop short of pretty much shutting down everyday life. First, Rogers starts with SARS and MERS. If you remember, these were deadly viruses, but they didn't spread easily. The origin story sounds familiar. In late 2002, an emerging pathogen started to cause severe respiratory illnesses in China. The cause, according to the WHO's website, quote, SARS coronavirus is thought to be an animal virus from an as yet uncertain animal reservoir, perhaps bats, that spread to other animals, civet cats in parentheses, and first infected humans in the Guangdong province of southern China. So that spread to over 26 countries and infected over 8,000 people, killing at least 774, according to the CDC. As Rogers says, quote, if the name didn't give it away, SARS was caused by a virus similar to the one that causes COVID-19, SARS-CoV-2, but it didn't have nearly the same impact. This is in spite of having a relatively high case fatality rate of 9.6%, compared to the current estimate for COVID-19, 1.4%. Then there was MERS, Middle East Respiratory Syndrome, which the WHO reports had an even higher case fatality rate of 34%. Now, I linked to a study in PubMed that cites evidence for camel-to-human transmission of MERS coronavirus, which I didn't know before I started digging into this. Now, fewer deaths than COVID-19, according to the Eastern Mediterranean Office of the World Health Organization. As of January 2020, there have been 2,500 cases, a little bit more than that, of MERS, and 866 associated deaths. So simply put, SARS and MERS were not as easily transmitted. The spread came from closer contact, so you're talking family members, romantic partners, healthcare workers to patients, or from patients to healthcare providers. And also, infected people did not spread these viruses to others before exhibiting symptoms. Now, pre-symptomatic transmission is an issue with COVID-19, as we know, but what we don't know is whether these people eventually have symptoms or are totally asymptomatic. Now, in contrast, once people got sick from SARS or MERS, they were either hospitalized or recovering at home, hence slowing down any potential virulency. Add to this that COVID-19 seems to spread readily from human to human, so people can be wandering around spreading the virus willy-nilly without their knowledge. And that's why, in a nutshell, social distancing is so important to stop its spread. Okay, so what about swine flu? Now, that seemed to spread quickly amongst people, and as Rogers says, it was easily spread, but it wasn't anywhere near as deadly. Now, swine flu emerged in the spring of 2009. Yes, the spring for any that may think warmer weather will rid us of all of our problems. It was a new version of H1N1 influenza, which is the virus that kicked off 1918 Spanish flu. The swine flu killed up to 575,000 people worldwide in the first year, and according to the CDC, may have infected over 1 billion people by the end of 2010. Yeah, I shuddered when I read that number. Now, just like COVID, it spread quickly, and it also might have spread from pre-symptomatic people to others. Still, our healthcare systems were not overwhelmed, just like they are now, and economies didn't come plummeting down. So what's up? The main distinction between COVID-19 and the swine flu is that the swine flu is a way milder, less deadly infection. The highest estimated case fatality rate with swine flu is less than 0.1%, which is way lower than COVID-19 estimates. Dr. Anthony Fauci, which is a name I'm sure many people now recognize, is the director of the National Institute of Allergy and Infectious Diseases and part of the White House's Coronavirus Task Force. He told 538 the 2009 pandemic, the H1N1 swine flu, that disease spread very, very well, but the fatality rate was quite low, and that's the reason why it wasn't dubbed as a particularly serious pandemic. Finally, there's Ebola, which emerged in 1976. It's a terrible disease, killing on average 50% of people infected, according to the WHO. So yeah, pretty deadly, but it's not easily transmittable. Ebola is spread through direct contact with bodily fluid of an infected person, so like blood or urine. Infected people also don't spread the virus until symptoms are obvious. So again, it's easier to isolate these people who are infected and limit any outbreak. And now we get back to why we all have to make these unprecedented sacrifices right now, and I know many of us more than others. The novel coronavirus is not easy to track or control. It can be easily spread by people who have no idea that they're sick, and it's severe enough to kill a lot of people, regardless of age group. So I'd hope that these 3 reasons alone can help put things into perspective.
Thanks, Cristina. Well, on that happy note...
No, there's always a silver lining. It's going to get better. We need to hang in there.
Well, we will now leave you in the capable hands of Adam and Darren. I hope that everyone is staying well and safe, and we'll talk to you soon.
Stay classy and indoors.
What's up, cuboids? How can your phone be tracked? In the latest Terminator film, Sarah Connor puts her phone in a bag of chips so that the GPS can't be tracked. Is this nonsense? With concerns about people gathering despite directives to the contrary due to the COVID-19 outbreak, cell phone service providers and powerful tech companies are sharing information with governments about your location. Should we all be putting our phones in chip bags? Let me preface this by saying that I'm not necessarily saying that you should or shouldn't be concerned about the government tracking your whereabouts under the guise of protecting you from COVID-19. This is certainly a serious health crisis we are facing. I've made every effort to reduce my contact with other people and have been following the guidance various levels of government have suggested. I have also personally taken the decision to try to minimize my phone's ability to track me, which doesn't affect me much while I've been spending most of my time inside my own home in these past few weeks. Now, this exercise has helped me realize how much or how little control I do have over how much my phone is tracked. It's up to you to decide what level of security you find appropriate for yourself. Security is always a trade-off between convenience and benefits and risk. So you don't have to ask yourself, do you trust the government to be doing the right thing in this particular circumstance? Here's some questions you can ask yourself. Do you trust your cell service provider? Do you trust the company which makes your phone? Do you trust the company which makes every piece of software on your phone? Do you trust your government at all levels, so municipal, provincial, or state, and federal? Do you trust a future potential government at any of those levels? Do you trust the police at any potential level? Do you trust all of these agents to secure your data from a nefarious third party? If you answered yes to all of these questions, then you don't have anything to worry about. So here's a basic question. How does your phone track you? Now, I used to think it was just GPS. It's actually a bit more complicated than that. In fact, you might not even have a GPS setting on your phone. iOS, that's iPhones and things like that, uses the term location services, while Android phones just usually call it location. Both types of phones do not solely rely on GPS for tracking of your location. It's usually a combination of things, and GPS is only one of them, though it's often the one that has the most accuracy when it's needed. For many reasons, GPS might not always be used, one of which being that GPS doesn't work well when you're inside a building. Your location can also be determined using cellular data, cell tower location, Wi-Fi, and Bluetooth. It's usually actually a combination of a number of these things. Now, understanding how all of these work might help you determine what might be needed to avoid having a site, an application, or a service provider track you. Now, cell tower positioning is common, and that's how your provider determines where your phone is. Basically, whatever cellular base station your phone is closest to gives an idea of where your phone might be. But it's actually a bit more complicated than this, as your phone can receive different strength signals simultaneously from different towers, which can give a decent indication of its actual location. In urban areas, this can be around 50 meters, but this will be less in rural areas. Wi-Fi can also be used, and this isn't necessarily the Wi-Fi hotspot you're connected to. Have you ever opened some map software and been told to enable Wi-Fi for better accuracy? Well, there are a lot of Wi-Fi hotspots out there, and their location is often known with some accuracy. So the provider is able to basically look at GPS information of other people's phones, look at the Wi-Fi hotspots they've come close to, and determine with a lot of accuracy where those might be. And based on what Wi-Fi hotspots you're close to, it can tell where you are as well. Depending on how strong a signal you receive, potentially from numerous Wi-Fi hotspots at once, your phone can actually get a very specific location. Bluetooth is another way of tracking you that I hadn't heard of until recently. So Bluetooth is pretty short range, it's usually less than 10 meters, but a place can be equipped with a lot of different Bluetooth receivers to track your phone, and that's another way they can do it. Apple and Google have partnered to create a COVID-19 contact tracing technology. This is projected to be available in May, with both Apple and Google claiming that this will be an opt-in kind of technology. So, you install the software on your phone, and if you come close to someone else who's running the same software, it tracks you. It tracks that you've been in close contact. If that person is later found to be COVID-19 positive, then you will be notified that you are potentially at risk. Great. What could go wrong? As with all privacy issues, there is a potential benefit and a potential risk, especially if this information is compromised, but even if it isn't. Could a government use this data to tag you as a potentially infected person and restrict your movement for the safety of other citizens? No bag of chips is needed for this one. Just turn off your Bluetooth. Now, you can also be tracked by IP address, though this might depend on your internet service provider. Your internet connection will usually be uniquely identified through a web page you are visiting. They might only get a vague idea of where your provider is based. So my home ISP has an IP address which shows up as Trois-Rivières, which is a city further away from me than Montreal. So your mileage may vary depending on who your service provider is. So what can you do? Well, to stop a specific application on your phone from knowing where you are, you just tell it not to in your privacy settings. On an iPhone, you just turn off your location services, and basically it'll stop that application or your entire phone from being able to track your location. Android devices have a similar setting. This will often not be called GPS because, as I've explained, it's much more than just GPS. If a cell service provider is sharing information with the government, then this is probably related to your location relative to cell towers. While there isn't much that you can do about this if you still want to actually use your phone as a telephone, using it for either data or phone or text, you could always turn off your phone, leave your phone at home, or put the phone in airplane mode. Now, airplane mode doesn't actually turn off GPS in a lot of phones, such as newer iPhone models, but it will block all cell data, Wi-Fi, and Bluetooth, so you're not likely having your position getting out anyway. Even if your position is being tracked, it won't be broadcast to anyone. Many people are confused to see that their map software might still update while they're in airplane mode, and that's because your GPS location is only received and not transmitted, so there's very little risk in an airplane. So if I turn off location services on my phone and I put it in airplane mode, it probably won't be tracked. But if I turn on Wi-Fi while in airplane mode to actually use my phone at home, supposedly the phone won't use that to determine my location, as I've told it not to, though again, some websites will still be able to get some information about where you are based on your IP address. So here comes the important question. Why did Sarah Connor need a bag of chips to block GPS? An article on Kaspersky Daily, a security website, looked at this particular issue. They determined that GPS is not the concern, but the sending of data was, and there is some logic to this. Who cares if your phone is tracking your location if you can't send it anywhere? One should only care about the phone's ability to send data via cell network or Wi-Fi, but I think a person should still care if their phone is actually tracking them. Even if I have no network connection of any type, a phone may track my whereabouts and then at a later time share that information when I do make a connection. I could be out and about snapping photos which are getting tagged with my location data, and then sometime later I could be at a place where my location is not something I feel the need to hide, and then I connect to the internet, upload my photos somewhere, and if they're still tagged with that location data, my location at the time of taking that photo is compromised. Now, this is a simple example, and most social media sites have privacy settings to restrict this, but if the US government, Skynet, or Legion are trying to track Sarah Connor, she might still need to worry about her phone getting a GPS location determined passively through received signals even while in airplane mode. Now, there are potentially other ways in which a phone could be tracked, for example, based on previous connections you might have made. So if I stole a car, connected my phone's Bluetooth settings to the radio, and then ditched the car, well, someone could go through the stereo settings and find that my phone had connected, and my phone might be called something like Adam Gardner's iPhone, and that could be a problem. Similarly, if I knew someone who was doing crime and I was over at their place, and for convenience, I connected to their Wi-Fi, and then their place got raided and they went through the router, they could find that my phone had been connected to it. Then if they got my phone, they might be able to go through my phone and see all of the different Wi-Fi hotspots I'd connected to in the past, and possibly find other people who are similarly doing crime. So there are other ways that you can potentially be tracked other than real-time data being sent to someone about your location. And this is a little more complicated, so there's a lot of other permutations like this that you might not always think about. But privacy can be a very tricky thing like that. So back to the important question, would Sarah Connor's bag of chips really work? Now, the hardworking people at Kaspersky Daily tried this out by putting their phone in a bag of chips and seeing if the phone still worked, if anything was transmitted or received from it. Now, the idea is that the foil in the potato chip bag could act as a Faraday cage, which is basically a cage around the phone which shields it from electromagnetic radiation, in this case, a GPS signal, cell data, and Wi-Fi, by surrounding it with a sort of conductive material, usually metal. Well, it turns out a bag of chips is not actually a great Faraday cage, but you know what is? 2 bags of chips. For good measure, they suggest using 3 bags of chips. Now, this is all well and good for blocking GPS, but not only is nothing coming in or out of your phone while it's wrapped in a couple of bags of chips, but your phone's probably useless unless you're actually inside the bag of chips as well. So maybe you could get a really big bag of chips and you and your phone could be in there and you could use it without worrying about it sending or receiving anything. But building a Faraday cage large enough to house a person is not terribly complicated, even though it might take quite a bit of metal. You might want a large Faraday cage to protect some of your electronic equipment against a future EMP strike, that being a natural one like a solar flare or a man-made one like a nuclear detonation in the upper atmosphere. Though a simple microwave oven would work for some small devices. You could put your phone in the microwave if you were worried that there was about to be an EMP. So as I've explained, there are a number of ways in which your phone can be tracked, and therefore there are equally large numbers of ways in which you can attempt not to be tracked. Which way you think is sufficient really depends on what you want to do. So if you want to be 100% protected, that's great, but your phone won't really be a phone anymore. But making some intelligent use of your privacy settings and thinking about where you are and maybe the more sensitive areas where you don't want to be tracked are important. So it might be that the best decisions, depending where you're going, is just to leave your phone at home or turn it off completely.
I recently finished the book The Precipice, Existential Risk and the Future of Humanity by Toby Ord. I think this is an important book, and that you should read it. Review done. Nailed it. Oh, I guess I should say a bit more, eh? Well, Toby Ord is a senior research fellow in philosophy at Oxford University's Future of Humanity Institute. He was one of the co-founders of the effective altruism movement, which I'm a fan of. He was one of those professors years ago that said, you know what, people are suffering, I should donate 10% of my income forever. He was working on global poverty for many years, and then he shifted focus to existential threats and the future of humanity. The book presents an overview of what existential risks are, X-risks, the different risks humanity faces, both natural and human-made, and then speculates on what would happen if we didn't kill ourselves and had a chance to become a spacefaring species. Existential risks are those that truly threaten the existence of humanity. So while there are good reasons to be concerned that something might kill 1 million or even 1 billion people, that would not be an existential threat. Why the existential threat is so much worse is that in addition to the loss of currently existing lives, there is the loss of all future lives to come. All those people, millions, billions, trillions, all the new advances in science, in art, in understanding, in happiness, all of this would be lost. He covers asteroid impacts, volcanoes, climate change, nuclear war, pandemics, and rogue artificial intelligence. All of these receive sufficient treatment for a book aimed at a popular audience. I also thought Ord does a good job explaining risk throughout with various examples, often highlighting how uncertain things are, and how we can sometimes, but not always, mitigate that uncertainty. Relatedly, I'm going to quote from a review in SiteStar Codex, linked in the show notes at trcpodcast.com. He is always careful to add a term for unknown unknowns. Sometimes he is able to use clever methods to bound this term, other times he just takes his best guess. And he tries to use empirically based methods that don't have this problem, list his assumptions explicitly, and justify each assumption, so that you rarely have to rely on arguments shakier than, asteroids will continue to hit the planet at the same rate they did in the past. I'm really impressed with the care he puts into every argument of the book and happy to accept his statistics at face value. People with no interest in existential risks may enjoy reading this book purely as an example of statistical reasoning done with beautiful lucidity. End quote. There's also many interesting tidbits of information in the book, and I'm going to extract some from a list on the 80,000 Hours post. Wilbur Wright predicted heavier-than-air flight was at least 50 years away, just 2 years before he himself invented it. Also, the Biological Weapons Convention, which is a global agreement to protect humanity, has just 4 employees and a smaller budget than the average McDonald's. Additionally, in the early 20th century, the Spanish flu killed about 3 to 6% of the world's population. In the 14th century, the Black Death killed 25 to 50% of Europeans, but it was the passage of European diseases to the Americas which may have killed as much as 90% of the local population, which could be 5 to 10% of the global population. He also talks about the British, and what is now Canada, giving blankets with smallpox to indigenous groups. Ord also indicates that resource depletion is less of a concern because of new discoveries, shifting needs, and shifting prices. As new technologies come about, the resources required to make those work shift over time as well. Price changes how much people are willing to pay for things. Also, losing bees would be bad, but not the end of food, as some people would suppose. Now, I'm going to be honest and say that although the audio is clear, the writing is linear, and concepts are explained well, I found it less compelling than I'd hoped, but I think that's largely because I knew a lot of the material going into this. And perhaps, I didn't really feel well while I was listening to that, and that affected my experience. I think most of his writing flair was saved for the last chapter, which discussed our potential, but I do wonder if the beauty and wonder of humanity could have been more present throughout. In all that speculation of our future, he seems to think that humans won't change much in the next couple hundred years. This makes no sense to me. If you're going to speculate in one domain, just keep going. As well, I wanted him to spend more time on counter-arguments and different ethical theories, but apparently he does this in the appendices that aren't in the audiobook, so I may be missing various other nuances and examinations. In fact, I just did some digging around, interrupting my own recording of this, and I think I might be missing 20% of the book if we include all the endnotes and appendices. So, I can't really fault him for that then, if it's already in there, but I don't have access to it. And here's a brief rant. Audiobooks really need to step up their game and provide access to some of these materials in the accompanying PDF, as they sometimes say, or at least just change the chapter titles so they're aligned with what's in the book. End rant. So for some of you, this is the perfect book for the time. It is highlighting how important it is that we act to save humanity so it can thrive for millions of years. It even talks about pandemics. How could it be more relevant? On the other hand, if you don't want to think about humanity suffering and existential catastrophe because you're already depressed about the COVID-19 stuff, I'll quickly recommend a completely different book. Caped Crusade, Batman and the Rise of Nerd Culture by Glenn Weldon. It's just great. Wonderful cultural analysis. If you're even a basic Bat fan, get the audio because he does good voices and enjoy the ride. Until next time, think better. to act better.
For show notes or to discuss this episode, visit our Facebook page and website at trcpodcast.com. For general inquiries or to send a topic or parody suggestion, email info@trcpodcast.com. Help support the show by leaving a review on iTunes and liking us on Facebook. Follow us on Twitter at @TRC_podcast.